Hello, health seekers. Welcome to another episode of the Keto Pro Podcast with myself, Richard Smith. Today, I am joined by an incredibly good friend of mine, someone who is one of the most knowledgeable people within this space, and this is the incredible Dr. Abs. Dr. Abs, welcome on board.
Thank you very much for having me. Good to see you again. And I'll try to live up to that intro.
Easily, no doubt. And 100%, I think... you burst on the scenes and you were new to me during the Carnivore 24, the 24-hour Carnivore-a-thon. And I think you were suggested as a step-in or a replacement for Professor Bart Kay. So obviously you came highly recommended, and the information that you've given out during the lives that you've been on with myself and Stephen and within the private school group and so on and so forth, it's been absolutely incredible. And I think there's a synergy there in regards to what you used to do, what you do now, and your need for learning and understanding. You have this drive and passion to understand the B, so we know that A gets us to C, but you were highly passionate. I think when we were talking, when I came up to your studio to record our podcast, you told me that you quite literally haven't had a day off in many, many years. I can't remember how many, but it was a long time. Yeah, super impressive. So look, thanks for this. I've been really looking forward to this because we're going to discuss a few topics today that I'm not very well versed in. But to kickstart, for the guys and girls who are listening that don't know who you are, could you give us a quick intro?
Yeah, of course. So obviously, my name's Abs. I started off originally as a dentist many years ago, qualified from dental school in the UK. Started working as a dentist. I noticed things didn't quite add up. Patients with plaque everywhere didn't have any issues, and patients without plaque had issues, which is the opposite of what we're taught. So then I remember two patients, but still very vividly, I remember them. I referred them for gum disease to a specialist, as I was taught to do. They came back, didn't work, and then you just go on this cycle of where you repeat everything, and still didn't work. And you just stay on this roundabout. And every dentist knows we have these patients. These two people just sort of gave up and said, look, I've had enough. I can't go through this anymore. So they came back 6 months later and everything was cleared. I didn't know what happened. One of them went keto, one of them went carnivore. And that's where it all began. And that's where the words came into my head, which I'd never heard before. I started looking into nutrition, came across Weston Price, which I'm sure many in this community have heard of. Looked into him. Then from nutrition, I understood all about the development and the way food plays such a big role in development, and the way it plays a role in disease. So from nutrition, I looked into a lot of obesity, and then from obesity into metabolism. And then from metabolism, inevitably you end up in mitochondria. That's just where I am now. So I'm also a consultant in biotechnology research, specializing in, shall we say, bioenergetics, which is a technical term, but I generally say mitochondrial function. People don't know what that is. And proteomics, or if you like, amino acids, to keep it nice and simple. That's where I am now. I also lecture at universities around the world. I've taught professionals. I've taught well over 10,000 doctors now around the world. I continue to travel. Probably every month I'm in a few different countries that people will see me in, speaking at conferences and things to help companies develop medical technology. You can see that on my channel as well. So fingers in lots of different pies. Right now, to keep it simple, I say I work in cosmetic and longevity medicine, which is the same thing. But people don't understand that normally. So I just say cosmetic and longevity, but it's encompassed by all those things.
Incredible. Do you know, the biggest takeaway there for me was that you were in a profession which has their objectives as a professional and their boundaries and the rules that they're told to stick to. And someone came along and basically said, I've tried something outside the box, look what it's done. And then that led you into researching that topic, i.e. keto and carnivore, instead of dismissing it completely. And now it's led you down a completely new career path, which is, I mean, for that to happen, the evidence that you found must have been incredibly persuading. And
Yeah.
you don't strike me as the type to brush over research lightly. And in fact, I know that you really go into depth with research papers and clinical trials. So am I right in saying that the evidence that you found to support these lifestyles was absolutely staggering?
Yeah, the word evidence is bandied around a lot, and I think to do justice to our audience here, I think we have to define the word evidence in this context. There's so-called evidence, and then there's inferencing, and then there's empirical observations, and they all are different things. But we throw the word evidence to encompass any of them at any time. What I found was things like paleobiology, which is where we look at the way we are now physically, biochemically, enzymatically, and we can infer what that means. So there is some opinion on that, but there is also empirical observation when we look at ourselves now. There is, again, empirical observations and measurements in things like isotope testing. And then the rest of it is really just opinion, to be honest. Even archaeology, paleoarchaeology, that is empirical measurements, things like the isotope testing. And people that say, I think we're vegan, or we have these teeth, so we must have done this, or we must have done that, or we must have eaten that. That's not evidence, that's opinion. And so evidence for me does point to us eating this way, living this lifestyle as being optimal. But there are different forms of evidence if we're going to be really open and honest and transparent to the audience.
Yeah, incredible. Some incredible points. So it's, my belief in regards to coming back to what your profession is now, longevity, living this lifestyle for me has been incredibly life-changing. As you know, the listeners are probably familiar with my story. And I believe this to be the biggest lever that we can pull. But outside of this, there are other factors in regards to the levers that we can pull. I believe that diet would make up 90, maybe 95+% potentially. But there are other factors like red light therapy and grounding and so on and so forth. So what I'd like to go into today, because I know that you are an expert in this amongst many other things, but I wanted to look into light a little bit. So in particular, how does the exposure of natural sunlight influence the mitochondrial function and energy production in the body? How does it change throughout the day? And does light have different points and have different effects throughout the day within the body? What is the benefit of natural sunlight to the mitochondria?
So natural sunlight is allowing our physiology to be optimal for many reasons. And indirectly through that means the mitochondria are getting what they need as well. Now, natural sunlight is, in terms of physics, it's a combination of many, many different wavelengths. That's why it looks white. We have all the different colors of the rainbow to keep it, child friendly, and all that put together makes white. That's why, for instance, if you go to a TV and you look really close, and I'm talking like millimeters away, you'll lose the picture and you'll just see blue, red, and green, or red, green, blue, I should say, RGB LEDs. And so sunlight is a combination of everything. And within that combination of everything, we have certain wavelengths. So, for example, we have UV. That has a significant effect on cells and mitochondria that increases things like reactive oxygen species, which is something which mitochondria are susceptible to damage from, that can lead to oxidative stress. So that doesn't necessarily increase function in that way. It can decrease function. And chronic UV exposure can lead to cumulative mitochondrial damage, which can contribute to premature skin aging, also known as photoaging, and possibly make it more likely that we get mutations as well because of those things. But then we have other wavelengths in there, like, for example, red, certain wavelengths of red, which we realize actually have really great effects. And we can hack that with modern technology to have not sunlight, but just the red. And that can then help specific functions within the mitochondria as well. So within sunlight itself, which composes of many wavelengths, from as high energy as, say, UV to as low energy as something like infrared, perhaps, there's things that help and there's things that hinder. Modern technology is able to differentiate between those and selectively utilize the bits that help while taking out everything else. So there's a lot of different mechanisms going on in sunlight to help mitochondrial function completely.
Yeah, and from an evolutionary perspective, I mean, this is something that we would have been exposed to, as well as grounding, isn't it? You know, so again, you know, this has sort of similar effects on the body, isn't it? So in regards to one of the lights now that, you know, you didn't mention there, which I'm guessing isn't natural, we hear a lot about blue light. And, you know, you and I are sat in front of some computer screens. I've got 3 in front of me. These are giving off the blue light now. So what is the role of blue light in regards to disrupting circadian rhythm? And can we limit the exposure of artificial light at night and improve sleep quality, etc.? I know that you know, you can buy these incandescent red and amber lights, which I know Sylvie, a friend of both of us at the Real Food Company, stocks and sells. Are there benefits to these, you know, or are there any other hacks that you can recommend to limit our exposure? Or is it a problem in the first place? Are we wrong? And, you know, is blue light maybe not as damaging as we were led to believe?
It's a question which, at least for the preliminary portion of the answer, is going to surprise people. Because the question actually, I would suggest to people, is an invalid question. Because blue light doesn't mean anything. There are different types of blue. And when we look at the electromagnetic spectrum and we look at what size a particle can be in terms of wavelength, blue encompasses a range. And when we look at blue in the wavelength range of around, say, 460 to 480 nanometers, depending on which scientific paper you read, you're going to, and that hits the eye, you're going to get a completely different effect to, say, 415 nanometers if that hits the skin, which looks blue, but technically could be classed as violet as well. So we have to define colors in this context. We have to define it mathematically, because blue to someone who works in phototherapy means something completely different to blue to someone like Sylvie, who sells blue light blocking glasses so people can sleep normally. And there's a very, very big difference. And so in the context of what you're asking about that initial range, that, let's say, height, that sort of longer range, maybe around 460 to 480 nanometers. And in that range, so the retina of the eye contains really specialized photoreceptors called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, so IPRGCs, and they're most responsive to this blue light. And these cells contain a photopigment called melanopsin that detects the blue light and then sends signals to the brain's suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN, which is the master clock located in the hypothalamus. The SCN then regulates the production of melatonin, which is a hormone that induces sleep and controls circadian rhythm, which, as I'm sure we all know. And then we can talk about different routes to production of melatonin using amino acids and things, but I guess that's a story for a different day. Now, the melatonin, there is suppression of that by blue light. So melatonin is crucial for regulating the sleep pattern. And then the pattern is the key word, not just the sleep itself, going into sleep. And so the blue light exposure in the evening or at night, and blue being defined by what I've said earlier at the start of this answer, that particular blue light, that definition, can suppress melatonin production, which can then delay the onset of sleep and disrupt the circadian rhythm, according to a lot of studies that we have now. Those studies aren't always controlled, so please do take them sometimes with a pinch of salt. But I think there's enough, at least anecdotal evidence, from people in this community, and not the carnivore community, but people who use these glasses, for instance, to suggest that that is the case. And studies have even shown that in even small amounts of blue light exposure in the hours leading up to bedtime can still significantly reduce melatonin production or melatonin levels, shall we say, which again makes it harder to fall asleep and stay asleep. But conversely, if we get blue light exposure during the day, that can help maintain alertness, reduce fatigue, and also synchronize the circadian rhythm with the natural light-dark cycle, which you would have had before the invention of electricity and just, being outside like cavemen and all that kind of stuff. So if we expose if we get the daytime exposure to blue light, and we help synchronize, for want of a better word, that circadian rhythm, then we can see how natural sunlight, which contains a significant amount of blue light, was what allowed our ancestors to keep their body's internal clock aligned with the external 24-hour day-night cycle. That was their version of it. Now, morning exposure, particularly from the sunlight, which I'm sure lots of people can hear Andrew Huberman talking about all the time, stare at the sun at 5 a.m. for 6 hours or something, that helps reset the circadian clock. That gives us the wakefulness during the day, and it prepares the body for later on when we sleep at night. And then that can show increases in things like alertness and mood and cognitive performance, which again is very hard to measure evidentially in terms of scientific studies. But I think enough people who do this can anecdotally say that's how they feel for us to say, yeah, I think this is what's happening. Now, modern day times are obviously very different to our cavemen past. We've got the LED screens, smartphones, computers, energy efficient light bulbs in the evening. They all then disrupt that natural circadian rhythm by delaying melatonin production. And they end up, essentially in layman's terms, they trick the brain into thinking it's still daytime, which is the issue. And so then you get the difficulty falling asleep. When you do fall asleep, the quality isn't as good. And if you do fall asleep, even with bad quality, you're not necessarily asleep for as long as you normally would be. That can then contribute potentially to things like sleep disorders, which in turn can then impact your overall health and mood and brain function, all that kind of thing. So you get a delayed sleep phase. That itself is called DSPS, delayed sleep phase syndrome, where you can stay awake late into the night and then have difficulty waking in the morning. The quality itself, obviously, will be reduced. So you can reduce the amount of deep restorative sleep, sometimes called slow wave sleep. And then if that is chronically done, I would suggest you're more likely to be I've got to be careful with the wording here. My opinion is that you are more susceptible to developing chronic diseases. I think that's the best way to put it. And then you have mental health implications, mood disorders, depression, anxiety, all those sorts of things. Shift workers, they have a lot of these issues. Many people don't know, but I've DJ'd for many years. And having a lot of friends who work in nightlife, I see this all the time. Especially at this part of the year where we're recording this in October. It's just, we've just finished freshers, really. And you see it this time of year massively in people that work for promotion companies who do events and things like that. So there's a lot that range of the blue can do negatively to us, and the steps that we can take, like those glasses and making sure we expose ourselves accordingly in line with the natural 24-hour light dark cycle to minimize the negative consequences of that.
Fantastic. Your list on your CV just continues to grow. So amongst all of these other incredible things, DJing and you speak several languages also, which is incredible. So it's
I do.
The man always learning. So interesting what you said there. So blue light is natural. It isn't just artificial, and it's there basically to regulate. So it could be beneficial in the day, potentially, for stimulation effects. But at what time would you say that we need to come away from the screens and the mobile phones? And how impactful is blue light from a mobile phone? I mean, I'm sat in front of 3 screens. Is the size of my tiny little screen on my iPhone, how's that going to compare to being sat in front of a PC, for example, at the same time at 8 p.m. in the evening compared to a mobile phone? Does it depend on the brightness and so on and so forth? And should we look at timings, or should we look at when the sun goes down in regards to the time of we're exposed to these blue lights?
Good question. I think I'll answer the bit about timings versus sundown first, and then everything else I think will make sense. In terms of should you look at sundown versus should you look at your watch, it depends on you. So for me personally, a lot of the time I will use my watch because I do a lot of traveling. So I have to work out, right, when am I on stage speaking or when am I doing that meeting? When am I, teaching there or whatever? Okay, I need to be awake at that point. So I've got to work backwards. So that means I've got to probably make sure I sleep at this point, so I'm not feeling awake at there. So in that kind of context, I'm calculating or trying to calculate by using my watch. If you're not doing that kind of thing, then I would say just look at if you're staying in one place, one city, one time zone, and you're kind of working in the same part of the day all the time, I would suggest you do it based on that work schedule, because you need to be awake for that work. If your work starts, let's say at 10 a.m. and you finish at 7 p.m., so a little bit later than most people who are maybe 9 to 5, then your cycle would probably be better off looking at your watch and shifting it along, rather than everyone else who might work. Let's say someone starts work at 8 a.m. when the sun actually comes up, and then they finish or they go to bed at 9 when the sun actually goes down in that part of the day. For them, they can forget the watch. They can just look at the sun. So it depends on when you need to be optimized for cognitive function and things based on your individual job, social calendar, general life. And then when you understand that, then you can plan how to live your day-to-day life. And in terms of screens versus phones, all these kind of things, I'm not personally aware of any studies that look at laptop versus phone versus screen versus TV, etc. And so I can't answer that question, but I thinking out loud, what I would suggest is it probably doesn't make much difference, because those receptors, when we look at what's happening in the eyes, they're still going to register, those changes. So it doesn't really matter whether it's coming from this or whether it's coming from that. The eye itself, the photoreceptor, doesn't know what source it's come from. The photon that interacts with the photoreceptor, let's say that photon is 470 nanometers. That's the wavelength. Now, a photon over here that I can somehow hold of 470 nanometers that's come from a phone versus one I've got in this hand that's come from a TV, as soon as they hit that photoreceptor, the photoreceptor has no idea what the source was, because there's no interaction with the source. There's an interaction only with the radiation. And that photoreceptor, like I said, is intrinsically photosensitive, retinal ganglion cells, IPRGCs. They only know the physical interaction between the photon and themselves, not where it's come from. So it wouldn't make sense, in my view, that the source has a different effect unless the source is producing a different radiation. If different sources are producing the same radiation, then it should make no difference whatsoever, because those radiations, if you could hold those photons and somehow look at them under some massive microscope, and you could look at them like this, you wouldn't know which one came from which source. So the photoreceptor wouldn't know which one came from which source. So it will react in exactly the same way, I would say.
So, I mean, essentially what we're saying there is doing this with your mobile phone is potentially just as bad as watching a 65-inch TV, for example.
I would suggest the biological change or the conformational state change of the protein, which occurs due to photonic interaction, will be identical. As to how many of those conformational state changes happen depends on how many photons hit. A phone at a certain distance is going to yield less of those photons hitting the IPRGCs than a TV from the same distance, because a TV has more LEDs, more light engines. But if your phone is here and a TV is on the other end of the lounge, theoretically it could be they produce the same amount. So to say which one would give more or less would depend on the distance as well. Because when a source such as a torch or a light that you use in photography is at a certain distance from a subject, as I'm sure any photographer will tell you, the decay of that light is happening in what we call a negative logarithmic curve. Some people describe something called an inverse square law. So if the distance from the source to the receptor increases by 3, then the amount of energy received per unit area that goes down by 9, 3 squared. And so it's not as easy as saying, well, the phone versus the TV. It's how much they're producing and at what distance are they? Theoretically, they could be the same. A phone in bed when you're here could actually give you more of this than a TV at the other end of the room, because you've offset that lower output of the phone screen by being much closer. And so there's less distance to you for the light to decay, so more reaches you per unit area, which is a complex answer. But this is why people don't know the full story when it comes to comparing LED devices as well, like red light devices. It's more difficult than just saying which is better. What's your use case? Then you can work out all these things.
And that's interesting, because what I find personally is, I work late. This is the path I've chosen. I love what I do, but it does mean that I'm stuck to a PC, maybe when beyond the time that I shouldn't be. But when I do come away from the PC and away from the screens, then my phone is there. And that when I sit down in the evening, and sitting down in the evening for me is typically around 11 p.m. I work all day. The routine for me, I drop my little girl to school. I get to the office by 8:30. I work there then until I need to pick her up from school. That's around 3:20, so it involves like an hour and a half of driving there, which is time away from the office. I drop her to her nan's, come back to the office, and then I work until 8:30, 9:30. Pick her up, drive home, chuck a steak in the pan, eat that, and then I'm back on the PC or studying for 3 to 4 hours. So I don't sleep as early as I should, and I'm aware of that. But if I'm away from the PC and I don't have anything printed, which I try to do, so if I'm researching something, I try to print it out so I can look at it, But then you've still got the other lights on. But anyway, I mean that's another story. But if I'm reading something on my on the mobile, it's there, isn't it? And it's even though the TV is off and the PC screens are off, then I'm potentially causing just as much damage as being sat by the TV. Yeah, interesting. Possibly more. Yeah, which is a scary thought. So what blue blockers, yay or nay in regards to in the evening? If I'm at the PC or on the mobile phone, are the blue blockers going to confer any benefit? Are they worth the hype?
Depends on the person. Generally speaking, for the context of minimizing disruption to circadian rhythm, by blocking the things that block circadian rhythm synchronization at night, in that context, yeah, it can do. Theoretically, you're going to get reduced suppression of melatonin or reduced disruption to melatonin production cycles, shall we say. So you're going to get minimum disruption to sleep regulation. And so you should get better sleep onset. You're going to get possibly protection from digital eye strain as well. So if you expose your eyes at night constantly for a prolonged period of time, you do get digital eye strain. Sometimes it's called, I think it's some PC vision syndrome or something along that. I could be wrong on that. Someone can double check that. Something like PC vision syndrome, dry eyes, headaches, eye strain, eye fatigue, those kind of things. So blue light blockers can help with that. So you get less visual discomfort. And then obviously you get that potential for reset or improvement of your circadian rhythm, which in turn should help with the long-term health issues physically and mentally if you're doing that chronically. It can be annoying for people. That's the downside. Effectiveness can vary because not all blue light blockers are the same. The effectiveness can vary quite widely. If you go for something really cheap, it may not block enough blue light to actually make a significant impact on melatonin production or circadian rhythm regulation. And people who are taking it for the sleep quality, they may think, I'll take this, but then their sleep quality still isn't improved because it's not a cure-all for all sleep issues. There are other things that go on. Vitamin D is required to have good during the day for good sleep at night, things like that. So don't take it thinking it's going to cure all my sleep issues. Take it thinking this is potentially going to help one possible factor, and that's the real way to use it. I don't think anyone will use it during the day, but if they do, it's inappropriate. So you're going to say?
And that was my next question, because you see influencers such as Dave Asprey, wearing blue blockers in the day. And I've seen other people do it also. And we had this conversation before we came on the call that I don't follow many influencers because I find that they tend to change the narrative to suit the algorithm for views. And I believe a lot of the content is based for a monetary purpose and not for educational purposes. Many of these influencers seem to change their opinions on things. So I don't know whether to buy into some of the stuff that they say and do. But you see many of them now wearing blue blockers in the day. And I'm just thinking, I'm not an expert. I know nothing about this field. Hence the reason I've called in an expert to explain. But
he was busy, so you got me.
Spot on. Yeah, he's coming on next week. It's all true. No, not at all. So, but as a complete novice, it just doesn't make sense to me to wear blue blockers in the day. Am I wrong? Or, does that... Okay, so we shouldn't be wearing them in the day, and it's okay to be exposed to the blue light from PC screens, during the day.
Yeah, blue light is not inherently harmful. People demonize it. It's actually essential for regulating things like alertness and cognitive function during the day. It's inappropriate exposure that leads to poor outcomes. Appropriate exposure leads to good outcomes. Did our ancestors block blue light during the day? It's an obvious answer. And so we have evolved to take advantage of those wavelengths during the day. There's nothing wrong with having sunlight, which includes blue light, during the day. Even if it's from a computer screen, you're going to get that in sunlight anyways. There's no point blocking it when you look at the screen. So overuse of blue light blocking glasses, especially during daylight hours, or in other words, in daylight hours, could interfere with your natural circadian rhythm as well by preventing the beneficial effects of blue light when it's needed to boost alertness. Some people report that, and I say some people, I've heard this just through clinical experience. You may have heard it from other people as well. I'm sure I've probably read it in forums online. I've heard people say that when they wear blue light blockers in the evening, it reduces their alertness and cognitive function, which can affect productivity if you need to work or do something mentally stimulating at night, which is dependent on that person's lifestyle and work and social calendar and everything. But imagine you get that during the day as well. Why would you want that during the day? So wearing it during the day, I think, is absurd, personally.
Yeah, good. Me too. So is there a difference, what are the potential health consequences of living primarily indoors and being exposed to the artificial light instead of natural sunlight? I'm sitting in an office now. I've got blackout blinds to my right. The sun isn't blazing outside, but it's I've got access to natural light. But for the means of recording and working, I'm essentially back in a box most of the day. I'm exposed to this light from an artificial source. Are there any health impacts in regards to having that blue light from a PC screen opposed to being outside? Logically, I think natural is best, and I should be exposing myself to natural blue light. But what are the health consequences of being stuck indoors opposed to being outdoors?
Also, the first thing that comes to mind is vitamin D deficiency, which I think is pretty obvious to most people. Sunlight, specifically UVB radiation, is necessary for the skin to produce vitamin D, which, depending on who you speak to, some people may just refer to it as a vitamin. Some people may say, yeah, it's vitamin, but I think of it as a hormone. And you can't argue with that. Like, it does exhibit hormone-like behavior. Whatever you want to label it as, it does the same thing anyway. But let's say it's a hormone. You got bone health, you got immune function, you got calcium absorption. Without sufficient sunlight, the body can't produce the vitamin D, leading to deficiency in all these things. Lack of vitamin D or vitamin D deficiency can cause rickets in children, osteomalacia or osteoporosis in adults, so increased risk of fractures and bone pain as well. Weakened immune function. vitamin D is crucial to the immune system, and lots of studies are out there which show that low levels are associated with a high susceptibility to infections, autoimmune problems, and maybe even more severe respiratory infections. You look at the incidence rate of, I don't want to say the word in case it hits the algorithm and does something bad, but there was a particular illness going around the world in 2020, shall we say. If you look at the incidence rates of that illness versus, say, the latitude of the world, if I'm not mistaken, it was greatly reduced around the equator, where it's much sunnier climates. And I'll leave you to draw the link between vitamin D and ability to fight respiratory issues in that. And I would say there's increased association with chronic diseases. Yes, it's association in the studies, but I think it's pretty obvious. You can say there will be some sort of causality there. So long-term chronic deficiency of vitamin D, more susceptibility, in my opinion, to things like cardiovascular disease, maybe even more autoimmune conditions. In combination with other things, I would suggest you're less able to stave off things like diabetes and certain cancers, possibly. But again, that's with other things. They're not caused by lack of vitamin D at all. I don't want people to think I'm saying that at all. As well as that, obviously, as we've spoken about, you get the disruption of circadian rhythm. I won't go through that again. And then the mental health impact. I think reduced sunlight is linked to, as I'm sure we can all guess, SAD, seasonal affective disorder, which is, I think, I'm not a clinical psychologist, but I think that's classed as a type of depression, if I'm not mistaken. And again, we're going to get that in darker months of the year, more like towards now. We're in October. And so the insufficient sunlight disrupts the production of serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter that regulates mood and potentially could lead us into areas of depressive symptoms like low energy, feeling sad, feeling hopeless, whatever, anxiety. I think there are some studies which show an association between lack of natural light and anxiety or mood disorders. And I think that's because sunlight stimulates the release of endorphins as well. As well as serotonin, which I mentioned. Cognitive impairment. This is another thing. I think it's hard to really measure cognitive function and cognitive impairment in objective, quantitative ways. But I think there's some, at least, pseudo evidence to suggest that it can have an effect on that. Like I said, the weakened immune system from the lack of vitamin D, the cardiovascular health, skin health, even. You look at miners. One of the benefits they seem to have is nice texture because there's no UV damage. However, they can get skin conditions, interestingly. Certain skin conditions like, say, psoriasis and eczema can get improvement with a little bit of sun exposure like UV, because that can help reduce inflammation and promote skin healing. I've seen pictures of families in America who turn all the lights off in the lounge and they had this sort of family UV lamp, and they all sort of got down to their underwear, put the goggles on, and stand in front of this UV lamp together. You don't see it anymore because we demonize it in the context of sunbeds and tanning salons, which, yeah, if you overdo it, I think we can all agree is not going to be a great thing. But I'm sure many clinicians around the world will see patients who have these sort of conditions. They'll go to a tanning salon and they'll say, do you know what, when I went, it got better. Or when I went on holiday and I was on a beach, it got better. So I think there's an improvement in skin health, which you're missing out on if you stay indoors. And people like yourself who have been there in the world of bodybuilding, as we can see in the background there, I personally feel there's a reduced muscle function as well, because vitamin E is essential for muscle function and strength. And a deficiency, I think you're more likely to get, say, what's the technical? Well, how do I describe it? Weakness or lower muscle performance, and chronic fatigue as well. So it's harder to stay active and maintain a regular routine. So there's a lot of different things that I think are negative outcomes in terms of not going outside. And so for me, if you don't go outside, there's so much to list that you're missing out on. I don't feel as though there's anything that can outweigh that to force you to stay inside, at least not chronically anyway.
Yeah, fantastic. It's, I do get outside of the office, obviously, to pick my little girl up throughout the day. I try to stay active a couple of times a week with running. So I'll be running tonight, for example, at 6. And that's when the sun is probably a little bit lower in the sky, so less UVB, a little bit more UVA. I feel that I'm getting enough. But I mean, the sun, regardless of cloud cover, it's always there. It doesn't have to be sunshine. Am I right in saying that? Or
yeah,
okay, so fantastic. So it doesn't mean that the sun needs to be blazing. You just need to be outside and exposed to the sunlight. Or even in my case, I could open the blinds, open the window, and just be exposed to a little bit of sunlight there to confer a benefit. So we're not saying that you need to be outside constantly. It's just having enough time outside to be exposed to these elements. What about when we look at vitamin D from animal proteins? Because we know that we can increase vitamin D from animal proteins, without sun exposure. I'm guessing that we're missing out on some benefit. But how much of those benefits are we missing out on? I mean, you've mentioned some there, but if we look at people from the Arctic, for example, or what am I thinking of? Eskimos. They are not open to an awful lot of sunlight. They consume lots of animal proteins, lots of natural fats, and their vitamin D is usually in a pretty good range. Are they missing out on anything for the lack of sun exposure, or are they able to achieve everything that we can by being exposed to sun?
It's a good question. I don't know of a study that has given one group an exact amount of supplementation while keeping them completely indoors, locked indoors, and the other group allowed outside until the serum level reaches the same level as the ones locked indoors. I don't think that study is even possible. So I think the answer to this question is more an inference, or maybe a hypothesis, based on just biochemistry rather than anything else. Now, obviously, there's a production difference. And when you get the energy from a photon of radiation, that's a completely different methodology to taking a supplementation. Now, the skin has an ability to regulate vitamin D production, meaning that excess vitamin D is not produced, which reduces the toxicity from natural sun exposure. And one of these ways is things like melanin to act as a shield. So when we take supplementation, we lose that. So we don't know when our body would have cut things off. And so you're just guessing, which automatically is a bit of a risk, because what are you guessing based on? You got absolutely no idea whatsoever. And that guess has got to be relative to your current level of melanin in the skin, which obviously is going to be different for me to you. And there's no way you're ever going to calculate that. So knowing the exact dose required as per when your melanin production would have been triggered, it's impossible to work out. As well as that, in terms of the effects, I would say the skin can produce large amounts when exposed. That's probably more efficient than relying on dietary sources alone, particularly in sunnier climates. I think a few minutes of sun exposure can give us significantly more vitamin D than, shall we say, at least a standard Western diet. As to a carnivore, I don't know. I don't know what vitamin D average would be from eating a carnivore lifestyle. And if you take it from animal protein, depending on how much you're eating, because different people have different amounts of appetite when they start carnivore, it may not be sufficient to meet the daily needs unless you have it in large amounts, depending on the size of the person, the amount of skin they have, their individual metabolism, all those sorts of things. So that, I think, is the main thing. And then the regulation of the overdose, you're just not going to get. That will be my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think, you've hit the nail on the head that we don't actually need an awful lot of sun exposure.
No.
It's the amount of increase we see in vitamin D through a little bit of sun exposure it's a lot. One of the other things that you just mentioned there, which I can also attest to, I used to suffer with severe skin conditions. I had boils all over my face, all over my back. My body was plastered in them. I don't suffer with them anymore. And I put this down to living the lifestyle, i.e. removing the compounds that are causing intestinal permeability and contributing to these things. But what I did find before I gravitated down the journey is that I would use Sunbeds. I was as white as a piece of paper, as white as my shirt, genuine. This is how pale that I used to be. I'm not much darker now, but I'm considerably darker than my shirt, I think. So I started to use the Sunbeds for that reason, because I had the skin conditions, and it did help. It helped a lot. So I think that indoor Sunbeds are demonized, and I agree. I think overexposure can be dangerous, but overexposure in the sun can be dangerous. If we sit outside by the pool with our tops off in blazing hot sunshine all day, then it's going to cause problems. So I think the use of sunbeds can be beneficial when used sensibly. I think that they're incredibly beneficial to lots of people, especially such as myself who are locked indoors.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can definitely attest to that. But would you say that if somebody can't get access to natural sunlight, that maybe 10 minutes, for example, on a sunbed a couple of times a week may be enough to mitigate the negative effects of not being outside?
It's a good question. I don't know. I don't know if I could give a time amount, because again, the time amount would depend on the individual, how much melanin they already have, what their body would use as a trigger to start the melanin production process and things like that. 10 minutes probably per session would probably be too much, I would guess. Something along the lines of a couple of minutes, maybe once a week, possibly twice a week would be more in line. I'm guessing here though, because I've not seen a study done on this. But also you've got to look at their diet, because if you're doing that, you've got to weigh up the risk of that or the benefits of that versus the risk or the possibility of developing skin cancer, which is going to be different based on the diet, as I'm sure both of us would agree on. So to not be possibly hindering the advice given to people watching this, I wouldn't rely on a specific time. I would actually get a consultation, look at your individual lifestyle in total, and then work it out based on that. I think it would be inappropriate to give it a one size fits all. So I don't think it's possible. However, I can see the argument for that being better than vitamin D supplementation, because when we get natural sunlight and the UV in there, obviously we get that, like we just talked about, the circadian rhythm. You can't necessarily get that, not that I'm aware of, from the vitamin D supplementation, because there's no exposure to the eyes. You can take vitamin D locked in the dark all day, but it doesn't mean your circadian rhythm is any more improved than before. So, benefits like that, the improved sleep quality, the alertness, the mood, things we talked about, you're going to get that with the sunlight, but not necessarily with the tablets, as far as I'm aware. Even SAD, when people have SAD, seasonal affective disorder, do they prescribe vitamin D supplements, or do they prescribe going outside, or maybe UV exposure or UV lamp or something like that? They don't prescribe the supplement, as far as I'm aware. They prescribe the other stuff to actually help. So those sort of things, I think, can't be replaced by the supplement, but you could potentially get them from a sunbed, maybe even nitric oxide production from the UVA, depending on the output of the sunbed. You're not necessarily going to get that from vitamin D supplement, but from exposure you can, which is why I always think the exposure is much, much better if possible. There's a time and a place for the supplement. I'm going to sound hypocritical. I do have the vitamin D supplements, but I use it in specific circumstances. So recently, for instance, some people following me on social media will know I was teaching out in New Zealand, in Auckland, and I spent the best part of just over 24 hours in a plane. So I couldn't go outside, but I didn't want to be vitamin D deficient on that day. So I took a supplement, and I obviously couldn't go in a sunbed because I'm on a plane. So in a situation like that, I would take a vitamin D supplement, and it's appropriate because that's the best I can do. But outside, I would say is best. Then maybe some kind of UV exposure artificially, then a supplement, I think, is the order that I would recommend.
Yeah, and I'd agree. I think, and touching base on something you just mentioned there in regards to the UVA, like the UVA, as we know, increases nitric oxide, and many of the benefits that we see that we attribute to vitamin D, I think, are possibly attributed to the increase in nitric oxide. It's a potent vasodilator, directly correlated with longevity. And I think that it's sometimes we chase vitamin D levels like unnaturally, whereas, as you say, maybe some exposure to the sun will remedy all of those things, and we don't need to hit specific numbers. We get caught up as a society in regards to how much of this. And you're right, we're all individuals. And I completely agree. I think just natural sunlight, doing things from an evolutionary appropriate perspective is going to be the best remedy. Yeah, I completely agree. I've always been a fan of the Sunbeds because they cleared my skin up in the early days. If I did stop, they would soon come back. But living this lifestyle, I very rarely suffer with skin conditions in regards to acne and boils now. So I do rate them. But what I have found is, and something else you mentioned there in regards to cancer, is that cancer rates, I believe, are significantly lower, even with excessive amounts of UVB exposure due to living a carnivore lifestyle, i.e. the removal of oxidized omega-6 or seed oils. These are very different from the natural cholesterol that the body creates from saturated fats, because it acts as a sunscreen, doesn't it? It's the vitamin D and the cholesterol connection. We quite literally burn and cook from the inside out when we consume the seed oil. So personally, and you can probably attest to this and add more to it, that I've noticed I don't burn in the sun anymore. I go a little bit red and then I go back to normal, and quite often I'll tan, whereas before I would be exposed to sun, I'd go beetroot red and I'd feel absolutely awful. My skin would burn and I'd be in pain for days and days and days, your typical beetroot. But do you find the same with the clients that you work with, that since they've gravitated into this and the removal of the toxic linoleic acid, i.e. vegetable oils or seed oils, as seen to be hugely beneficial in regards to cancers and burns and so on and so forth?
Completely. I as again I was taught to, I wore sun cream. I taught everyone wear sun cream. I still used to burn even with sun cream on quite a lot. Now I don't wear anything and I never burn. And I used to go noticeably darker. Like if I saw someone 1 week and then I hadn't seen them the following week, but I didn't wear sun cream, or even if I did wear sun cream and I burn, I see them the week after, they say, have you been outside a lot? Because they can notice it very quickly. Whereas now, this entire summer, well, I'll say summer, Britain, we get about 2 days of summer, let's be honest. I didn't wear sun cream once. I never burned. I never went dark. I stayed the exact same color all throughout. And I didn't overheat either. I mean, to be fair, the overheating thing, I've got to be honest with that. I do use a sauna, so I'm adapting to the heat. But even then, I would say I completely agree with you. You get that ability to tolerate the sun without burning in it. And another thing I've noticed is when I get patients to go out in the sun more during weight loss journeys, I think they get improved weight loss. Some evidence or some literature is coming through, I should say, which suggests that the UV can actually directly affect adipocytes, fat cells, to help reduce the amount that's stored and promote weight loss. And that's unique to sunlight. Again, another thing that vitamin D supplementation can't necessarily do.
Yeah, and that's incredible. And sunlight exposure early in the morning and late in the evening stimulates melanocyte-stimulating hormone, which helps with hunger cravings. So it just seems that it doesn't matter which angle or which perspective we put on this, nature seems to know best.
Yeah,
Shocker.
Always.
Shocker. So a couple of other questions. I'm conscious of your precious time. But look, can using red light therapy mitigate some of the negative effects of excessive blue light exposure? Can that mitigate the negative effects, or is it just a case of lowering the amount of blue light exposure?
I don't think red light will reverse the damage done by excessive blue light exposure. I think red light has its own set of benefits. Again, I say red light, what you have to define it. It's technically an invalid question in the world of phototherapy. Like we had to define blue, and we're talking, that particular wavelength that we mentioned, 460 to 480 nanometers, depending on what paper you're on about. But in red, it's not going to reverse the blue. Red isn't something that's going to suddenly reset your circadian rhythm. Red is something that has a different photoreceptor, and so has different changes it causes in the skin, and therefore different benefits that it has for us. Each wavelength has different photoreceptors, which means if you think of it as each key opens a different door or a different lock, and behind each door is a different room in your house. You take the blue key, put it into the blue door, and you enter a room where you can't sleep properly. You take the red key and you put it into a red door, you go into a room where you get improved cell function. And this is how they work. So they're completely different effects, not necessarily related. You could draw a mechanistic, indirect relationship where you say, well, we improve the cell function, therefore we're helping skin health, and a lack of blue light during the day or UV during the day is going to be helped with that, etc., etc. And then that can help your circadian rhythm ultimately if it helps enough of you, blah, blah, blah. But you're being really mechanistic at that point, but they're unrelated, I would say.
Okay, fantastic. And that's interesting. That's incredibly interesting. So just to touch base really quickly, I understand that you've had a hand somewhat in developing a new style of LED face masks. Can you tell us a little bit about this and potential benefits?
I mean, I've worked in phototherapy for many years. People may not realize this, but I've invented protocols which are used all around the world in phototherapy. And so I get asked to consult for companies who are in the space for my expertise. And I consulted for a guy called Tom Pellereau and his lordship, Lord Alan Sugar, or to me, he'll always be Sir Alan Sugar from The Apprentice when I was a kid. And together they were looking into LED technology and basically medical technology in general, because I'm still consulting for them in other things. And they wanted to create an LED mask. All LED masks are flawed. Whether they're well made, whether you like them, whether you hate them, they are all flawed. I won't go into those flaws right now. I have done videos about it. I think my video was called Why All LED Masks Are Flawed or something like that. However, this particular mask that Tom wanted me to help create, we accept those flaws, and in return, we create a system which is possibly, or is, one of the cheapest in the world. And so even though it's flawed, you're paying a price that is okay to accept the flaws. It is only £99, and we have developed what I believe to be the most powerful LED mask in the world. I say I believe because I've never seen a mask more powerful, even when you compare it to market leaders. So there may be one which we haven't tested yet, which is less powerful than, but so far, I believe it's the most powerful in the world. And so for £99, which is really not a lot in the grand scheme of things, you have what I think is the most powerful LED mask ever made. And so you can get tremendous benefit for your skin health when you consider the fact that some creams and skincare are way more than that. And this is much, much less. And even if a skincare product is cheaper than £99, by the time you get to the end of the year, you bought it more than once, or the next 2 years or the 3 years, that'll be more expensive. But this is a one-time purchase. So this can play a part in home skin health and skin routines way more effectively than a lot of skincare. And theoretically, someone could actually use this instead of skincare if they wanted to, with the different settings. And I know there's room for bias in these things, but I have no bias because I have no financial gain if anyone buys that mask. There was an affiliate code that Tom made. Unfortunately, there's a problem with the website, so the code couldn't even work. So I don't even get that now. So I have no bias if anyone buys it. I have no bias. I have no gain if anyone buys it. I have no gain if Tom makes money from it. I have no gain if anyone speaks positively about it. I'm just being factual about the power levels and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, fantastic. So what sort of benefits could you see if someone were to use that regularly, and how often should they use that? What sort of changes could they? Me, for example, if I was to start using something like this, I'm not genetically gifted, even though I no longer suffer with severe acne and what I'd call bad skin conditions. My skin isn't brilliant. I don't have that fantastic tan and glow like your good self, but I do what I can. If I was to start using something like this, could I expect to see any benefit to my skin?
Theoretically, assuming we check diet as well, because you've got this mask, putting it here, and you might go like 5 steps forward in skin health. But if your diet always makes it go back 10 steps in the same time period, there's not a lot you can do. So you always have to look at the mask in the context of the person. That's number one. Now, assuming there's nothing else making you go backwards constantly, or only a minor amount, theoretically, it could give you the best skin you've ever had across the board for everyone. I say theoretically because, like I said, it depends on what else the person's doing. If you use this mask, but you're having a diet full of oxalates and lectins and cyanogenic glycosides and glycoalkaloids and all these sorts of things that possibly are giving you autoimmune conditions and skin conditions, and you put the mask on, but the cause of that skin condition is still there every single day, there's only so much you can achieve. But that's not a flaw of the mask. That's a flaw of your lifestyle. So assuming we have nothing working against the mask, then theoretically, yeah, it could give you the best skin of your life, and possibly even without any skincare on its own, it could theoretically give you the best skin of your life for just £99 as a one-time payment for years.
Yeah, absolute bargain. And I think at the Carnivore conference where you kindly came to speak there, somebody from the audience described you to me as the perfect human. So it's,
wow.
So moving forward, I'm going to refer to you as Abs, the perfect human, or the perfect man. That's what they said to me.
Okay.
He's the perfect man. So yeah, we'll use that, and that falls in line in regards to what you do as far as longevity, being the longevity expert. So, I mean, any advice that you give should always be taken, because you clearly know what you're talking about. You're an expert in the field. You're an expert in many fields, and I always appreciate your advice. So, look, I don't want to take any more of your time. Thank you for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. Where can people find you? Where can people follow you? And how can people contact you for consultations?
Yeah, sure. I've got a YouTube channel. It's Dr. Abs. I'm sure many people that are watching your channel will probably watch mine as well. Just type in Dr. Abs into YouTube. It should be the first one that comes up. Instagram, same. Type in Dr. Abs. It should be the first one that comes up. My website is drabs.clinic, drabs.clinic. You can see what other stuff I'm doing there. I am actually going to be doing, at the time of recording this, I'm doing courses soon. So next month in November, I've got a course on NAD+, the science of it, how to use it, etc., how we use it I'm seeing literal reversals in Alzheimer's. Like it's that incredible. How we do that and how people can use it at home for similar things. In January, I'm going to be doing a course on hyaluronic acid and its use in skincare and dermal fillers and all these things, how you can pick a dermal filler, how you can pick the right skincare, the right skin booster, injectable, all those sorts of things. And next year, at the time of recording, in 2025, I am going to be doing a course on longevity as well. It is mainly aimed for professionals, healthcare professionals, because you need a minimum level of knowledge to understand certain things. But there will only be 20 places for that, because it will be extremely intense, 7 days in a row, all day, every day, going through pretty much the whole thing. And it's never going to go out of date, because human physiology is going to stay the same between now and the day you die. So there's a few things happening.
Love it. Fantastic. And I'd love to get on board on some of those. That's absolutely incredible. Abs, pleasure as always, my man. Thank you very much. Take care, and I will speak to you soon.
Take care.